Welcome and thanks for joining me for the Gut Health Turnaround Series 2.0, 21 ways to heal your gut, reclaim your energy, and look and feel amazing. My name is Leah Kline, Health and Wholeness Coach, and I'm your host. Today I'm being joined by Dr. Tom O'Brien again. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Leah. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, and he's going to be talking about gluten and gut health and autoimmunity and how all that goes together. Some background information. Dr. O'Brien is a world expert on gluten and its impact on your health. He is an internationally recognized and sought-after speaker and workshop leader specializing in complications of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, and the development of autoimmune diseases as they occur inside and outside of the intestine. He is the founder of the www.thedoctor.com and the visionary behind the Gluten Summit, A Grain of Truth, bringing together 29 of the world's experts on gluten connections to disease, disorders, and a wide variety of symptoms and ages. You can find this information at theglutensummit.com. Dr. O'Brien is considered the Sherlock Holmes of chronic disease and metabolic disorders. He is the clinician par excellence in treating chronic disease, metabolic disorders from functional medicine perspective. He holds teaching faculty positions with the Institute of Functional Medicine and the National University of Health Sciences. He has trained thousands of practitioners around the world in advanced understanding of the impact of food-related disorders and the development of individual autoimmune disease. His 2016 critically acclaimed groundbreaking book, The Autoimmune Fix, outlines the step-by-step development of degenerative diseases and gives us the tools to identify our disease process before symptoms are obvious. So that's what you've been up to lately.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah. Just as a little intro, when did you start learning about the gut health and its role?
Before I started my medical education, when I was a long-haired hippie in Ann Arbor, Michigan, back in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a magazine called Prevention Magazine. And back then it was really quite exceptional. And one of the writers was a new doctor, just graduated from the University of Michigan. And I was at the University of Michigan at the time. His name was Dr. Jonathan Wright. He's still a world expert. And he would talk about cases. A patient comes in, it would be a case study. And he'd talk about what happened to that person, what they presented with, and then what he would do for that person. And in most every case, he always had to deal with the gut in terms of the foods they were eating, how the foods were affecting their gut, function of the gut. There was almost always some reference to the gut. And I was reading some alternative newsletters back then, things like that. And some of the old-time speakers like Dr. Bernard Jensen or Dr. Christopher, the iridologist, reading of the eyes. Some of these people, all of the old ones, the great ones who've been in practice for 30 or 40 years, they all wrote about the gut. And of course, Hippocrates talked about treating the gut with disease, always look to the gut. So it just kept coming back again and again. When I looked for sources of wisdom, not just knowledge, because there's lots of papers you can read about anything, but wisdom. So people who had been around the block for a long time, like Hippocrates, they often referred to the gut. And now I'm at that place in my life where I've got 35 years behind me, and I know, and that's why I teach for the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I'm the first science guy they hear. We get them for 5 days. We get doctors for 5 days, nonstop, 6:30 a.m. until 7 p.m. They have hosted breakfasts where there's talks and all that. I'm the first one they get after the welcoming and the introductions, and I talk about the gut. And I say, we start here for the week. This is where we start, doctors, because you're going to see the connection that occurs between gut imbalances and every other system of your body. And that's how we start them in their functional medicine education. And that's a result partially of my functional medicine education.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit, on the gluten end of things, what it is and how it's affecting our gut.
Sure. Gluten is not bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Bad gluten is bad for you. And we have to differentiate that. And unfortunately, the language we use in our culture today talks about gluten sensitivity. We really shouldn't have done that, because there's gluten in rice, and there's gluten in corn, there's gluten in quinoa. They're not bad for you unless you're allergic to rice or allergic to corn or allergic to quinoa. Then they're bad for you. But the glutens that are bad for everyone are in wheat, rye, and barley. And Harvard published the most recent study on this. Hollon, Hollon, and Fasano at Harvard published last year. They took people with celiac disease. That's when you have a wheat sensitivity affecting your gut, and it's chewing up the gut.
Yeah.
And people just recently diagnosed with celiac disease, so that means their guts are all chewed up. It's called MARSH3. People who were diagnosed with celiac disease and had been on a wheat-free diet for at least a year, so their guts were healing and they didn't have symptoms. People that did not have celiac disease but had a sensitivity to wheat, they were categorized as non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and people that did not have a problem with wheat. So they looked at all four groups of people, all four groups. And what did they find? When they exposed them to wheat, and this was their language, all humans had the reaction where they developed what's called intestinal permeability. The slang term is the leaky gut. Everyone developed leaky gut when they were exposed to wheat within 5 minutes of the exposure in the small intestines. And their language was all humans. So for everyone that's watching this, if you fall into the category of being human, that means this relates to you. Because we have people that say, well, I feel fine when I eat wheat. It doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter if you don't feel anything, because the damage is accruing in the gut, and eventually you will feel it. You know, if you pull at a chain, the chain breaks at the weakest link. It can be at one end, the middle, your other end, the heart, the brain, the liver, the kidneys, the gut. Wherever your genetic weak link is, that's where you're going to feel it when you pull on the chain too hard. So the lucky people are the ones that get gut pain, because when they eat something, they feel bad right away.
No, it was what they ate.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they're lucky because they can't be blind, you know. But the ones that are not lucky are the ones that get a migraine the day after they ate it. And they can't tell. They just think, oh, I got a migraine today. Where'd that come from, right? Or joint pains, or skin problems, you know, breaking out in rashes, or acne, or psoriasis. You don't associate that it's what you ate yesterday or this morning, and now 6 hours later you got these symptoms, because your gut doesn't hurt. But what they told us from Harvard was all humans. That means you. Sorry, but that means all of us. Now, why is that? Why is wheat such a problem? Because it's in the Bible, it's the staff of life. And two answers. First, to the Bible declaration, with all due respect, no one on the planet is eating the bread that Jesus Christ ate. So stop that. Stop that. Now, what about if you go back and ate the ancient breads? Because people ask these questions, they're really good questions. Theoretically, if you had never been exposed to the current bread and developed the antibodies to the current bread, theoretically, maybe the ancient strains would be okay for you, theoretically. But once you develop increased levels of antibodies to wheat, it's permanent. It's the only food that I know of, the only one, where you develop these things called memory B cells. That's what happens in our immune system. When you get a vaccination, like measles, you develop a memory B cell to measles. So 5 years later, if you're exposed to measles, the memory B cell that's in your system says, oh, that's measles. Make antibodies right now. And it has to just flip the switch to produce the antibodies for measles. It doesn't have to build the assembly line, because when you got the vaccination, that's when your body built the assembly line for measles antibodies. But the memory B cell watched all of that and said, okay, there's no more measles from the vaccination in the bloodstream. We've killed all that off. Turn off the assembly line. I don't need measles antibodies right now. And so if I were to check you, you shouldn't have measles antibodies right now, unless you expose, then you should. But if you are ever exposed again, general measles in the immune system, the memory B cell for measles, is vigilant the rest of his life. The rest of his life. If measles ever comes back, he just has to flip the switch. He doesn't have to build the assembly line that takes months to build. He just has to flip the switch, and in 2 days, you've got elevated antibodies to measles to fight the measles that you were just exposed to. That's why if you go to Africa, you need vaccinations months and months ahead of time for yellow fever and dengue fever and all these weird diseases. But if you go back 15 years later, you just need a booster shot 2 weeks before you go. Everyone's heard of a booster shot. You just have to wake up the memory B cell for yellow fever and dengue fever and turn on the assembly lines to make the soldiers to protect you. The only food that I've ever found the evidence of that our immune systems make memory B cells is to wheat. Not to eggs, not to dairy, not to corn, not to anything else, just wheat. And I don't know why that is. I've talked to some immunologists and can't really figure out why that is. But what that means is that once you make the elevated antibodies, meaning you now have general gluten that built the assembly line, general gluten, the memory B cell for wheat, is vigilant the rest of his life. If you're ever exposed to wheat again, he just has to flip the switch. And in 2 days, you've got the elevated antibodies to wheat, right? And for those that don't get gut pain, if it affects your brain, like it did for me, my weak link in my chain was my brain. And I had elevated antibodies to myelin basic protein. That's what causes MS. I had elevated antibodies to the cerebellum. That's an area of the brain that controls your muscle movement. That's why old people can't walk with grace up and down the stairs. You know, it's because their cerebellum is just not working very well anymore. It's been being killed off over many, many years, over decades, right? So wherever your weak link is, if you're exposed to wheat, again, general wheat turns on the switch for the assembly line. Here come the antibodies to wheat. And wherever your weak link is, that's where you might develop the elevated antibodies to that tissue. Your brain, your heart, your lungs, your liver, wherever the weak link is in your chain. That's why once you've had elevated antibodies to wheat, it's permanent. Even when the antibodies come down, you go complete, squeaky clean, gluten-free, wheat-free, gluten-free. And 6 months later, you check the blood test, it's down to normal. Great, congratulations, Mr. Patient, doing fine. Well, can I eat wheat now? No. And then I tell the story of the memory B cells and general gluten and all of that. And they say, well, can I try? I said, well, sure, you can try. Go ahead and have a cracker, like a Ritz cracker or something. Have one cracker a day, every day. Do it for 2 weeks. And then let's wait another 2 weeks, and then we'll do the blood test. And then let's see if the antibodies go back up by having one cracker a day. And remember, the weak link in your chain was your brain? That means when the antibodies go back up again, they likely are attacking your brain. And that's the inflammation that develops. You know, no one gets Alzheimer's in their 60s or 70s. You get Alzheimer's in your 20s and 30s. It just takes decades of killing off brain cells until you've killed off enough brain cells. Now you get the symptoms. And
to get noticeable.
That's right. That's right. But it takes decades. It takes decades to get rheumatoid arthritis, to get MS. Nobody gets these diseases overnight.
Yeah, yeah. So You talked about that a lot of people can, if they don't have gut symptoms, not know that they have a gluten problem.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people out there that, probably possibly do and have no idea. How would they go about knowing that they did have a gluten problem?
You have to do the right test. Mm-hmm. And the problem is the tests have been notoriously incomplete. Mm. They're accurate for what they look for, but they don't look for enough. Here's why. This is patient. Proteins are like a pearl necklace. Hydrochloric acid that's made in your stomach undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls.
Yeah.
Your enzymes are scissors that cut off each pearl of the pearl necklace. Mm-hmm. And then when the enzymes actually cut off a clump of pearls, and then other enzymes cut off the ends of that clump, and then the ends again, and then the ends again, and over on this clump, the ends, and then the ends, and the ends, and the ends. So you're constantly breaking down into smaller clumps, mm-hmm. until you get down to one pearl. And that individual pearl is called amino acid. Mm-hmm. And your intestines are a tube. The tube is 20, 25 feet long, kind of winds around inside your gut, The inside of the tube is lined with shag carpeting. Mm-hmm. And one shag is where calcium's absorbed, one shag vitamin C, one shag the amino acids. All the shags absorb different nutrients.
Yeah.
And so when the proteins have gotten cut off into each little pearl, the shags are covered with cheesecloth. And so only certain size molecules can get through the cheesecloth. So the pearls of the pearl necklace, the amino acids are small enough to go through the cheesecloth. But the clumps of pearls that are starting to be broken down are too big to get through the cheesecloth. That's why they have to go further down the intestines. That's one reason why the intestines is 20 feet long. Some foods take a whole long time to digest, like pot roast versus a banana. The pot roast, the meat fibers take a long time to break down into individual amino acids, right? But eventually they do, and then those individual amino acids go through the cheesecloth into the shags, into the bloodstream. Mm-hmm. What happens now, when you eat wheat, remember I said at the beginning, all humans get intestinal permeability. So what is intestinal permeability? Intestinal permeability is tears in the cheesecloth. Mm-hmm. So now that pot roast coming down, and it's being broken down into clumps, but now a clump gets through the tears in the cheesecloth before it should be able to get through. Mm-hmm. That's called a macromolecule, a big molecule. And your immune system looks at that, says, whoa, what's this? This is not good for me. I can't use this as a building block to make new muscle cells or bone cells. I better fight this. Now you make antibodies to pot roast, to beef, or to tomatoes, or to chicken, or to radishes, or to cucumbers. And this is a person that does a 90 food sensitivity test. They come back sensitive to 25 or 30 foods. Oh my God, that's everything I eat. Well, of course it is, because your immune system's trying to protect you. Your gut's chewed up. You got tears in your cheesecloth. And so these macromolecules get in before they should be able to get in, before they're broken down small enough. And your immune system's just trying to protect you. But now it's in the bloodstream. Your immune system's fighting it. Now, wherever the weak link is, you're likely to make antibodies also to your brain or to your heart or to your liver. So you eat the food, you keep eating the food because you don't know, because you don't get stomach pains unless that's the weak link in your chain. You don't get stomach pains, so you keep eating the food. They keep going through the tears in the cheesecloth, keep making the antibodies. The antibodies also attack your thyroid or your brain or wherever it is, where the weak link is, and your thyroid gets disease. You get thyroid disease. You get the autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, or you get the autoimmune disease of the heart, cardiomyopathy, or you get the autoimmune disease of the brain, MS, or wherever the weak link is. But it's the gut. The gut is the pathway into the development of the autoimmune diseases. That's why you have to focus on the gut. And the research is very clear, and this is their language. You can arrest the development of autoimmune disease by healing the gut. That's the big kahuna takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
You can stop the development of the number one cause of getting sick and dying is your immune system attacking your own tissue. Cardiovascular disease is autoimmune. Cancer is autoimmune. Most of our degenerative diseases are autoimmune. That's where they start. And the studies say you can arrest all of that. You can stop it by healing the gut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is so important. Of course, obviously, I believe that, or we would not have the summit called Health. Yeah. And so what are some of the ways that people can heal their gut, whether going off of gluten or other things?
Sure. Well, the rule of thumb here, now as far as I know, it's strange to say all because there's not much that's all or every, but I think this is an all diseases. I think so. All diseases are inflammation. They're inflammatory diseases. The cell is on fire. It just depends. Is it a kidney cell or a brain cell? Is it gasoline or kerosene? So it's silly to think there's a magic pill that's going to fix your gut. That's just, excuse me, that's just silly. There's no such thing. Now, there are some magic pills, they're not magic, but there is some nutrition that helps a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But the first rule of thumb, when you want to fix your gut, stop throwing gasoline on the fire. Yeah. Because if you're spending the money to take the nutrition that studies show is very helpful, but then you're eating the foods that are gasoline on the fire, how well do you think you're going to get? You know, it's going to be the roller coaster ride, and you feel a little better, then you don't. You feel a little better, then now my thyroid's acting up, and you feel a little better, no, you don't. You feel a little better, and you don't. And the thyroid's getting worse, and you're gaining weight because that's the weak link in the chain. You know, that, of course, there is nutrition that's really valuable. You know, I've been a nutritionist for 30 years, and I teach nutrition at the Institute for Functional Medicine. Of course it's important, but it's not the first step. Yeah. The first step is stop throwing gasoline on the fire. So what does that mean? It means you got to figure out what you're sensitive to. Now, it's either external, like what's on the end of your fork, or it's internal, meaning you've got dysbiosis and the microbiome is way out of balance, and that's causing intestinal permeability. So you have to figure out where's it coming from. So you have to investigate where's it coming from. Mm-hmm. You do a test for intestinal permeability. You do a test for your microbiome to see what kind of diversity you have in your microbiome. You do a test to see do you have a food sensitivity or not. And the most common foods are gluten and dairy, wheat and dairy. Those are the most common ones. It certainly could be soy. It could be corn. It could be eggs, peanuts, bananas, anything. It could be anything, but the most common ones are wheat and dairy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I have seen that myself many times. Yeah. And so one of the ways that people would, not be pouring more gasoline on the fire is by doing a gluten-free diet and, getting off of those. What are, kind of the benefits and dangers of going gluten-free?
Good question. There's multiple levels to that question. I teach a 12-hour course for healthcare practitioners, certifying them as gluten practitioners. So that's about an hour and 20-minute answer. What you're saying, so I'll just give you the bullet version. Right. I'll give you the condensed version. So the first danger of going gluten-free is that your microbiome that you've developed is completely dependent on wheat. That for 78% of Americans, wheat is the primary prebiotic that they get in their diet. And so when you take wheat out of the diet and you replace it with wheat-free or gluten-free paste, all of those products are just paste. And when you replace it with paste, you alter your microbiome and you get more dysbiosis because you're not feeding the good bacteria anymore. That's a huge danger. So that means 3-6 months after you go wheat-free, at first you feel great, then you start not feeling so well. It's because your microbiome is changing. You've not been feeding the good guys anymore. It's not that wheat is bad in every aspect. Its prebiotics are good for you. They're really good for you, for the bacteria that live in the gut. But there are other reasons why wheat is a problem for you. So you have to find other prebiotics. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when you do a comprehensive test looking for sensitivity to wheat, you look at many of the clumps of the pearl necklace, because in humans, we can't break it down into each pearl of the pearl necklace. We can't break down the proteins of wheat into the pearls of the pearl necklace. All we can do is break it into clumps. And the research says there are at least 62 clumps of the pearl necklace when you eat a piece of bread, 62 clumps of the pearl necklace that might stimulate an immune response and could damage your gut. 62. Every laboratory checks one of the 62. That's all they check is one. It's a 33 pearl clump called alpha-gliadin, but they only check one. Well, wait a minute, there's 62. Why are we not checking the rest? It's a really good question. No one's been able to answer why the labs don't check the rest. So a lab came out about 5 years ago that looks at the top 10. And you no longer get false negatives, meaning you do a test and it says there's no problem, but you always feel better when you don't eat wheat. But the doctor says, no, see, the test is fine. Well, it's because the test only looked for one clump of the pearl necklace. There are other clumps that you may be reacting to that this initial test the doctor did doesn't look for. Yeah. So it gives a false negative. And I explain that in a handout that we'll give to you after this talk today about why the tests are often wrong. So one of the clumps of the pearl necklace that are very common for people to have a reaction to it are called gluteomorphins. And the gluteomorphins, they're a clump of the pearl necklace of wheat that acts on the morphine receptors. They're called the opiate receptors in our body. They stimulate the opiate receptors. So when you give up wheat, you can actually go through some withdrawal symptoms if you have elevated antibodies to the gluteomorphins. So when we do the test and we see if a person has elevated antibodies to the gluteomorphins, Mrs. Patient, it's always best to get this stuff out of there right away because it's gasoline on the fire. But in your case, because you have these elevated antibodies, this tells us you might have a hard time with this. You can feel kind of anxious and irritable. It can kind of feel like you can't get out of your skin, that kind of thing. So let's just transition you down slowly. Let's start with one meal a day, every day. One meal a day, pick a meal. Maybe it's breakfast. No wheat products at breakfast. And after a week or so, when you've got that down, then pick a second meal a day. Maybe it's lunch. No wheat products in breakfast at lunch. And then you'll just slowly transition it so you don't go through a cold turkey phase.
Yeah.
So those are the two major dangers of a gluten-free diet. One is the lack of feeding the probiotics in your gut. So the loss of the prebiotic sources of food. Wheat is a prebiotic. Sorry, I have something in my eye. And the second one is if you have gluteomorphin antibodies elevated, you can have withdrawal symptoms. Those are the two primary ones. The third one is that if you were eating wheat bread and muffins and stuff like that, they use enriched flour. So it's got a little bit of a few vitamins in it. And none of the gluten-free products are enriched. So you can develop a deficiency of some of the vitamins if you weren't getting enough of the B vitamins from your food or from supplements that you were taking. If your body was dependent upon the wheat products for your B vitamins, you can develop a deficiency of the B vitamins. So you just want a nutrient-dense diet, meaning you eat foods that have a lot of bang for their buck. You know, lots of vitamins and minerals in the foods that you eat.
All right, so what is kind of one of the things that our listeners could, do to help their gut, and that they could just start, doing today?
It's a really good question. There are two things. The first one, and I use the example of Whole Foods, but any natural food store you can go to and buy 5 different types of fermented vegetables. So as long as they're not pasteurized, because pasteurization kills bacteria. So you want fermented vegetables because when the vegetables ferment, they're producing good bacteria, the good guys for your gut. Mm-hmm. And get 5 different types: kimchi, sauerkraut, curry flavored, Italian flavored. Just pick some different types. Beets, fermented beets, really great. Just pick different types, and every day you walk by the refrigerator with a fork, and you take 1 forkful of a fermented vegetable and change it out every day. Just do a different one. And you may like the taste, you may not, I don't care. Eat it anyway, because what it's doing is it's inoculating your gut with good bacteria. And you just do a little bit every day, 1 forkful every day. It's base hits that win the ball game. You don't want to go for home runs. Give me the magic pill where I'm better. There is no magic pill. You're going to have to shift the lifestyle that's caused the problem. Yeah. This is like, wake up. We all need to wake up to this. And this is one way of doing it. Just have a forkful every day of some fermented vegetables. The second thing is go online, go to Google and type in list of prebiotic foods. Mm-hmm. And boom, here come the list of all the different prebiotic foods. Print it out, put it on your refrigerator. And every day, make sure you have at least 2 prebiotic foods, because the prebiotics feed the probiotics in your gut. And you want to keep the good guys strong and vibrant and just abundant, because they keep the bad guys in check. There's no room for the bad guys to grow when the good guys are just abundant. So you want to have prebiotics every day, just 2 of them every day. Onion is a prebiotic, garlic, wheat, but you're going to take wheat out of there. Jerusalem artichokes. There are just lists, and bananas a prebiotic. You'll see that there are many, many, many different foods. So you'll just pick a few, and then maybe next month switch them out with 2 different ones, so that you're always there. You're varying what you're taking, because you want to feed all of the communities of the good guys in your gut. Do you want to know how much bacteria we got in the gut? Yes. You want to know?
Sure.
Take 1 gram of stool. 1 gram. Now, that's not a topic that people like talking about very much, but 1 gram. Mm-hmm. And there's more bacteria in 1 gram of stool than all the stars in the known universe. 10 to the 14th. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. In 1 gram of stool. Now, you've got 25 feet of intestines. Mm-hmm. That bacteria outnumbers humans 10 to 1. There's 10 times more cells of the bacteria in our gut than there are cells in the human body. Mm-hmm. And this bacteria in your gut has 150 to 200 times, depending on which study you read, 150 to 200 times more genes, more genetic expression than the human genome. We have 23,000 in the human genome. There's 150 to 200 times more, 3 million or more of different genes in the human genome. They control us. We don't like thinking about that, but we really are bacteria having a human experience. There's 10 times more of them, 150 times more messages for control than the human genes make. Who do you think's running the ship?
Yeah, true.
And that's a topic people don't like to think about. What do you mean I'm all bugs? Well, of course you're bugs. They do studies of women with breast cancer. They find that the bacteria that's inside the breast with cancer compared to the other breast is very different. That you have bacteria in your organs, you have bacteria in your skin, you have bacteria in your gut. And they're supposed to all live together as symbiotes. Symbiotes mean everybody lives in peace and harmony. Don't make waves. Yeah. But when you do things like antibiotics or Coca-Cola or too much acidic foods. You kill off the good bacteria. The bad bacteria start to thrive in there, and you're off to the races. When you get enough of that bad bacteria, it will cause the tears in the cheesecloth. Now you get the macromolecules going through into the bloodstream. Your body makes antibodies to those macromolecules, the weak link in your chain is your brain. Now you start making antibodies to your brain. And it's because of the dysbiosis in your gut causing the tears in the cheesecloth, this whole mechanism begins.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us about your free gift for our listeners?
Good, good. Well, let's see. I interviewed 29 of the world's leaders about gluten sensitivity with or without celiac disease, and we have the Best of the Gluten Summit for you. And you hear pearls from 29 of the world leaders on this. It's really quite jaw-dropping. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And that keeps happening again and again. And then we have 3 articles for you. One of them, it's the conundrum of gluten sensitivity, why the tests are often wrong. So you can read this article about how to get yourself tested properly. And I put the studies in there so you can take it to your doctor, print out a copy for your doctor, and say, hey, would you please read this? I'd like to try this test. Would you order this test for me, please? And if they won't, you can order the test on my site. But it's always better to get the test done by your doctor. Always better, because then the doctor gets to learn more for the rest of your family if you need to bring in your kids sometime in the future. So you've got the Best of the Gluten Summit, 3 articles, and there's also a coupon there for, I think it's $10
yeah,
off
I think that's
any of the products that are on our site.
all right. That is a great free gift. Lots of value there. And how can they connect with you if they want to learn more directly from you?
Oh, thank you. The website is thedr.com. The doctor, just don't spell the word doctor out, thedr.com.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Tom, for joining me again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Come back tomorrow for more of the Gut Health Turnaround series.